Du-Won stared at the medical screen in front of him, then rubbed his eyes and looked again. The readings couldn't be right. He had been studying alien species for 30 years, but he had never seen anything like this before. "Run the tests again," he told his assistant. His 4 fingers tapped nervously on the metal desk. The soft beeping of medical machines filled the quiet laboratory. Lieutenant Jae-Yun Kim lay on the examination table, sleeping peacefully. 3 days ago, she had arrived at the Galactic Research Institute with a deep cut across her arm. The wound should have killed her. Instead, it was already healing. "Sir, the new test results are the same," his assistant said, holding up a datapad. "The human cells are multiplying at an incredible rate, but there's something even stranger. They're creating scar tissue." Do-Won's antenna twitched with excitement. "Scar tissue? That's impossible. No known species can do that." He walked over to examine Jae-Yun's arm more closely. Where the cut had been, the pink line was forming. The human's body wasn't just fixing the damage. It was building a permanent patch to make the injured area stronger. Du-Won had never seen anything like it. "Should we wake her?" the assistant asked. "No, let her rest. Though I must say these humans sleep very strangely too. Short periods of unconsciousness instead of proper hibernation cycles. Fascinating." Do-Won went back to his desk and began recording his observations. Day 3 of studying first human specimen. Subject continues to display unprecedented healing abilities. Most remarkable is the formation of reinforced tissue at injury sites, so-called scars. This suggests humans evolved on a planet where repeated injury was common enough that their bodies developed permanent repair mechanisms. He was interrupted by a quiet groan from the examination table. Jae-Yun was waking up. "Good morning, Lieutenant," Du-Won said, walking over to her. "How are you feeling?" Jae-Yun sat up and stretched. "Much better, thank you. Is my arm healing okay?" "Okay. Lieutenant, your arm is doing things that should be impossible. May I ask, is this normal for humans?" She looked at the pink scar forming on her arm and shrugged. "Pretty normal, yeah, though I've had worse. You should have seen me after the engine room accident last year. 3rd-degree burns all down my back. Took almost 2 whole months to heal completely." Do-Won's antenna stood straight up in shock. "You survived 3rd-degree burns and healed in only 2 months. Is that not normal for other species?" "Lieutenant, most species don't survive major burns at all. Those that do take years to recover, usually with extensive medical help." Du-Won paused, choosing his next words carefully. "What exactly happened in this engine room accident?" Jae-Yun shifted to sit more comfortably on the examination table. "Well, we had a plasma conduit rupture. I was doing maintenance nearby when it blew. The safety shields failed, and I got caught in the heat blast. Burned right through my protection suit." Do-Won's assistant dropped his datapad. "You were exposed to raw plasma energy." "Yeah, but the medical team patched me up pretty good. The new skin grew in pink at first, but it tanned to match the rest eventually. Want to see?" Before Du-Won could answer, Jae-Yun was lifting the back of her shirt, showing a large patch of skin that was just slightly darker than the surrounding area. Du-Won had to sit down. "Lieutenant," he said weakly, "plasma exposure is fatal. Always. The energy destroys cellular structure completely. Recovery should be impossible." Jae-Yun lowered her shirt. "Huh. I guess humans are tougher than we look." "That's putting it mildly," Du-Won muttered. He picked up his datapad and added a new note. "Urgent. Expand research into human cellular regeneration. Subjects appear to survive conditions that violate known biological limits." Just then, the laboratory door slid open. Director Hansol walked in, his ceremonial robes twishing against the floor. "Du-Won, I need your preliminary report on the human specimen. The council is asking for updates." "Director, you're not going to believe this," Du-Won said, gesturing to Jae-Yun's arm. "Humans can regenerate damaged tissue and create reinforced repairs. They can survive plasma burns. Their healing abilities are beyond anything we've seen before. Hansol's eyes narrowed. Don't be ridiculous. No species can survive plasma exposure. Check your instruments again. I already did, sir. 3 times. And Lieutenant Kim has the scars to prove it. Scars? Hansol looked confused. Permanent tissue modifications at injury sites. Humans create them automatically as part of their healing process. It's remarkable. Hansol walked over to examine Jai-Yun's arm himself. She held it out patiently, used to being studied by now. Impossible, Hansol muttered. The cellular structure, the nerve regeneration, the enhanced tissue density. He looked up at Jai-Yun. Does it hurt? Not anymore. It itches a bit while it's healing, but that's normal. Normal, Hansol repeated faintly. Do one. I want a full report on my desk by tomorrow. Every test, every scan, every piece of data you can gather. The council needs to know about this. Yes, sir, though I should mention, this may only be the beginning. Lieutenant Kim has shown several other biological traits that don't match any known patterns. Her temperature regulation, her sleep cycles, her dietary capabilities. One impossible thing at a time. Do one, Hansol said, holding up his hand. Focus on the healing abilities for now. We can explore the other irregularities later. After Hansol left, Do-One turned back to Jai-Yun. Lieutenant, would you be willing to participate in some additional tests? Nothing dangerous, I assure you. We just want to better understand how your healing process works. Jai-Yun smiled. Sure, why not? Though I should warn you, human biology can be pretty weird. My last doctor nearly fainted when I told him humans can regrow fingertips. Do-One's antenna twitched again. You can what? Oh boy, Jai-Yun laughed. Maybe we should save that demonstration for another day. You look like you've had enough surprises for one morning. Do-One nodded weakly and went back to his notes. Behind him, he could hear Jai-Yun humming quietly as she examined her healing arm. The sound reminded him of something he'd read in the preliminary reports about humans using vibrating air patterns for communication and entertainment. Another biological impossibility to add to the growing list. He looked at his assistant, who was still staring at Jai-Yun with a mixture of fear and amazement. Send a message to the biology department, Do-One said quietly. Tell them we're going to need more research staff. A lot more. As he turned back to his work, Do-One couldn't help but wonder what other surprises human biology had in store for them. If this was what they learned in just 3 days, what would they discover in 3 weeks? 3 months? One thing was certain. The Galactic Research Institute would never be the same after meeting humans. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice wondered if that was a good thing or not. Species that could survive plasma burns, regrow body parts, and patch themselves with reinforced tissue weren't just unusual. They were terrifying. What kind of planet could produce creatures like this? And more importantly, what other abilities might they be hiding? Do-One pushed those thoughts aside and focused on his data. One mystery at a time, he told himself. Though somehow he suspected that understanding human biology would be the work of a lifetime, if it was possible at all. 1 week after the healing discovery, the Galactic Research Institute faced its first major crisis. The station's main reactor was becoming unstable, and the radiation levels in the maintenance sector were rising to dangerous levels. Do-One stood in the emergency meeting room with Director Hansol and the station's senior staff. The displays showed bright red warning signs across the reactor diagrams. The radiation will kill anyone who goes in there, the chief engineer said, his scales turning pale with worry. Even with our best protection suits, exposure would be fatal within minutes. Lieutenant Jai-Yun Kim, who had been quietly watching from the corner, stepped forward. I'll do it. The room fell silent. Director Hansol was the first to speak. Lieutenant, perhaps you don't understand. The radiation levels in their air are high, yes, Jai Yun interrupted. But humans can handle more radiation than you might expect. Our cells can repair radiation damage pretty well. Do Won's antenna perked up with interest. Lieutenant, are you saying humans have radiation resistance? It's not exactly resistance, Jai Yun explained. It's more like adaptation. We call it radiation hormesis. Small amounts of radiation can actually make our cells stronger. And even with bigger doses, we can usually survive if we get treatment quickly enough. The chief engineer laughed nervously. That's impossible. Radiation destroys cellular structure. No living thing can adapt to it. Jai Yun pulled out her personal data pad and showed them some files. Here are the records from the cleanup of an old nuclear accident on Earth. Hundreds of humans worked in high radiation areas. Many of them lived long, healthy lives afterward. Do Won grabbed the pad and started reading. His eyes grew wider with each scroll. Director, she's right. These radiation levels, they're higher than what we're seeing in the reactor room. And these humans survived them. Director Hansol shook his head. Even if this is true, we can't risk. Sir, Jai Yun said firmly, that reactor is going to fail if someone doesn't fix it. I'm trained for this kind of work, and my body can handle the radiation better than anyone else here. Let me help. The room erupted in argument. Do Won watched as his fellow scientists debated the impossible biology of humans once again. But they were running out of time. Director, Do Won said, raising his voice above the others. I've been studying Lieutenant Kim's biology for the past week. Everything she's saying matches what we've observed. Her cells do have extraordinary repair capabilities. If anyone can survive this, she can. Hansol looked at the reactor displays again. The warning lights were spreading. Finally, he nodded. Very well, Lieutenant, but you'll wear our best protection suit, and you'll follow every safety protocol we have. Jai Yun smiled. Of course, sir, though you might want to make the suit loose enough that I can sweat. Sweat? Someone asked. Yeah, sweating helps us get rid of toxins, including radiation particles. Do Won quickly added another note to his ever-growing list of human biological impossibilities. 20 minutes later, Jai Yun was suited up and ready to enter the reactor maintenance area. Do Won stood at the monitoring station, watching her vital signs. Remember, he said through the comm system, if you feel anything unusual, anything at all, you get out immediately. Don't worry, Jai Yun replied cheerfully. This is nothing compared to the radiation levels during solar flare season back home. Before Do Won could ask about that concerning statement, Jai Yun entered the reactor room. The radiation sensors on her suit immediately began screaming warnings. The entire control room watched in tense silence as Jai Yun worked. Her vital signs remained steady, even as the radiation levels around her climbed higher. She moved with careful precision, adjusting the reactor systems one by one. Lieutenant, Do Won said after 20 minutes. Your exposure levels are almost done, Jai Yun interrupted. Just 2 more adjustments. Do Won looked at his medical screens in amazement. Any other species would be dead by now. But Jai Yun's body was actually fighting the radiation damage. He could see her cells repairing themselves in real time. Finally, after 32 minutes, the reactor warnings began to fade. Jai Yun emerged from the maintenance area, looking tired but otherwise fine. How do you feel? Do Won asked as he helped her out of the suit. A bit nauseous, she admitted. Might throw up later. That's normal though. It's just my body getting rid of the damaged cells. Normal, Hansol repeated weakly. He had been watching the whole thing. Lieutenant, you just survived radiation levels that would kill any other known species in seconds. That is not normal. Jai Yun shrugged. Maybe not for you. But humans evolved on a planet with lots of background radiation. Our bodies had to adapt. Adapt. Do Won's scientific curiosity was burning. You mean your entire species evolved radiation resistance? How? Why? Well, Earth has these things called banana plants. Jia began, then stopped when she saw Du-Won's confused expression. Actually, maybe we should save the explanation about naturally radioactive foods for another day. I really could use some rest. Do-Won nodded and led her to the medical bay. As he ran the post-exposure tests, his mind was racing. Humans didn't just survive radiation. They had evolved alongside it. They ate radioactive foods. They adapted to radiation exposure. Their cells could repair radiation damage. What kind of planet would create such resilient life forms? And what other surprising adaptations might humans have? Later that night, Do-Won sat in his office, writing his report. On the screen, he typed, "Human radiation response appears to violate known laws of biology. Subjects survived 32 minutes of exposure that would kill other species in seconds. Evidence suggests this is not an anomaly, but a species-wide adaptation. Recommend immediate review of all assumptions about biological limits." He paused, then added, "Personal note. If humans evolved these abilities just to survive on their home planet, what does that tell us about Earth? And what other biological surprises are we going to discover?" In the medical bay, Jia slept peacefully, her cells busy repairing the day's radiation damage. Her vital signs beeped steadily on the monitor, each beat a reminder that when it came to human biology, the impossible seemed to be just another day at work. The next morning, Director Hansol found a report on his desk. The title read, "Terrestrial Adaptations: How Human Biology Rewrites the Rules of Radiation Exposure." Below it was a note from Do-Won. "Sir, you might want to sit down before reading this one." 2 weeks after the reactor incident, the Galactic Research Institute received an emergency signal from a damaged human transport ship. Director Hansol had no choice but to offer them shelter, even though he worried about having more humans on the station. Do-Won watched through the observation window as the rescue shuttle docked. 5 humans emerged, led by a young engineer named Tai. They looked tired but otherwise healthy, despite having spent 3 days in a failing ship with minimal life support. "Welcome to the Institute," Do-Won said as they entered the medical bay for checking. "I'm Chief Medical Officer Do-Won." Tai smiled and bowed slightly. "Thank you for taking us in. Our ship's systems failed during the journey. We had to shut down everything except basic life support to save power." "How did you survive?" Do-Won asked, checking their vital signs. "Our records show your ship's temperature dropped to near freezing." "Oh, we huddled together for warmth," Tai explained. "Humans are good at keeping each other warm. We also took turns sleeping while others stayed awake to watch the systems." Do-Won's antenna twitched. "You stayed awake for days with minimal rest." "Yeah, humans can do that if we need to. We get a bit grumpy, but we can handle it." Jia, who had stayed on the station to help with human biology research, walked in. "I brought some food from Earth storage for everyone," she said, carrying a large container. Do-Won watched in fascination as the humans began eating. Their food choices made no sense to him. Some items were incredibly spicy, others were fermented, and a few looked barely processed at all. "Lieutenant Kim," he said quietly, "are all these foods safe for humans?" "Sure," Jia replied. "Humans can eat almost anything if we cook it right. See that red sauce Tai is using? It's made from capsaicin peppers. Most species would consider it a dangerous chemical, but humans eat it for fun." Do-Won quickly grabbed his datapad and started recording. "Capsaicin tolerance. How is that possible?" "We're not just tolerant," Tai said, adding more hot sauce to his food. "Many of us actually love spicy food. It releases endorphins, makes us feel good." "You get pleasure from a chemical that causes pain?" Do-Won asked, his antenna standing straight up in shock. "Welcome to the weird world of human biology," Jia laughed. "Want to try some?" Do-Won quickly stepped back. "No, thank you. I prefer to study these phenomena, not experience them." Over the next few days, Do-Won's research team observed the human refugees closely. Each observation seemed more impossible than the last. They discovered that humans could digest an incredibly wide range of foods. They could go days without sleep if needed. Their bodies could adapt to both hot and cold temperatures. Most surprisingly, they seemed to enjoy testing their physical limits. "Look at this," Do-One said to Director Hansel, showing him the latest data. "They exercise by deliberately damaging their muscles, which then grow back stronger. They expose themselves to harsh conditions to build resistance. They even eat toxic substances in small amounts to develop immunity." Hansel shook his head in disbelief. How did such a species evolve? What kind of planet creates creatures that thrive on stress and damage? "Earth must be an incredibly dangerous place," Do-One said. "Everything we learn about humans suggests they evolved in an environment that tried to kill them in every possible way." Just then, they heard laughter from the recreation area. The humans had set up some kind of physical competition, testing who could hold their breath the longest. 3 minutes and 42 seconds. Jai-Yun announced as Tahi finally took a breath. "Not bad." Do-One rushed to add this to his notes. They can voluntarily stop breathing for extended periods. And they do this for entertainment. "Humans are full of surprises," Hansel muttered. "Have you finished your research paper?" "Almost," Do-One replied. "Though I keep having to add new sections. Every day we discover something new about their biology that should be impossible." That evening, Do-One sat in his office, finalizing his paper titled Terrestrial Anomalies: The Impossible Biology of Humans. His main screen showed download statistics. It was already the most accessed article in the Institute's history. As he worked, he could hear the humans in the nearby dining area, talking and laughing. They were eating something new, a fermented food that smelled terrible to him, but that they seemed to love. Their ability to eat spoiled food and convert it into energy defies everything we know about digestion, he wrote in his notes. They don't just survive these foods, they deliberately create them and consider them delicacies. A notification popped up on his screen. More scientists from across the galaxy were requesting access to his research. Everyone wanted to know more about these strange creatures who could heal from deadly wounds, survive radiation, eat poison for pleasure, and adapt to almost any environment. Do-One looked through the observation window at the humans. They were arm wrestling now, another activity that deliberately strained their muscles. Tahi was teaching some of the station's alien staff about Earth sports, describing activities that sounded more like survival training than entertainment. "The most remarkable thing about humans," Do-One wrote in his conclusion, "is not any single biological trait. It's their entire approach to existence. Where other species avoid stress, humans embrace it. Where others seek safety, humans push limits. They don't just survive harmful conditions, they actively use them to become stronger." He paused, then added one final note. "Perhaps the most important question is not what's wrong with human biology, but what's wrong with our understanding of what biology can do. These humans aren't just breaking our rules, they're showing us that our rules were far too limited to begin with." As if to prove his point, he heard a crash from the recreation area, followed by laughter. When he looked out, he saw that one of the humans had fallen during their games. Instead of seeking medical help, they were comparing bruises like badges of honor. "Note to self," Do-One muttered, "add a section about their strange relationship with pain and injury, and maybe start a new paper about their psychological adaptations. Clearly, their minds are as unusual as their bodies." The humans' laughter echoed through the station again, a sound that once seemed strange but was becoming wonderfully familiar. Do-One smiled and went back to his work, knowing that tomorrow would bring new discoveries about these remarkable creatures who seemed to defy every law of biology simply by existing. The Galactic Research Institute's worst day began with a simple power fluctuation. Nobody worried much at first. Power problems were common in space stations, but this time was different. Do-One was in his laboratory, studying some new data about human bone density, when the emergency alarms started blaring. The station's main systems were failing one by one. All personnel report to emergency shelters immediately, the computer announced. Warning: life support systems critically damaged. Environmental controls failing. Do-1 rushed to the command center, where he found Director Hansol already organizing emergency teams. The humans, Jai-Yun, Ta-He, and the other refugees were there too. Status report, Hansol asked, his antenna drooping with worry. It's bad, sir, Ta-He said, looking at the system displays. We've lost main power. Backup systems are failing. Air pressure is dropping in several sections. Temperature control is gone. And he paused, checking another screen. We're losing artificial gravity in some areas. We need to evacuate, Hansol said. But the rescue ships won't arrive for at least 6 hours. Sir, Jai-Yun stepped forward. We might not have 6 hours. At the rate these systems are failing, conditions will become lethal for most species much sooner than that. Do-1 looked at his medical datapad. She was right. The station's alien crew would start dying within 2 hours as the temperature dropped and air pressure decreased. Already, some of the more sensitive species were showing signs of stress. That's when Ta-He spoke up. The humans can help. We can handle these conditions better than most species. Let us try to fix the systems. Hansol looked doubtful. The environment out there will be extreme. No life support, varying pressure, freezing temperatures. Perfect working conditions for humans, Jai-Yun said with a small smile. Remember the reactor incident? We're tough. We can handle this. Do-1 suddenly understood. Everything he had learned about human biology over the past weeks, their incredible adaptability, their resistance to extreme conditions, their ability to function under stress, it all made sense now. Humans weren't just weird. They were survival machines. Director, Do-1 said, they're right. Their biology makes them uniquely suited for this crisis. Humans can survive extreme temperatures through their sweat system and internal temperature regulation, function in low oxygen conditions thanks to their efficient respiratory system, handle pressure changes because of their flexible bone and muscle structure, work without food or sleep for extended periods, heal quickly if they get injured. They're our best chance. Hansol looked at the failing system displays, then at the humans. Finally, he nodded. Do it, but be careful. The humans quickly organized themselves into teams. Jai-Yun and Ta-He would tackle the main power core. The other 3 humans would split up to handle life support, temperature control, and pressure regulation. Do-1 watched from the command center as they worked. The humans moved through areas that would kill most species, their bodies adapting to each new challenge. In the low-pressure sections, they kept working even as their blood vessels expanded to prevent nitrogen bubbles from forming. When they entered freezing areas, their bodies shivered to generate heat while their blood flow adjusted to protect vital organs. In high radiation zones, their cells worked overtime to repair damage. Look at this, Do-1 said to Hansol, pointing at his medical readings. Their bodies are literally changing to match each environment they enter. Their bones are flexing under pressure changes. Their blood chemistry is shifting to handle oxygen variations. They're even digesting proteins differently to create more energy. 4 hours into the crisis, Jai-Yun's voice came over the comm system. We've reached the main power core. It's completely dead. We'll have to restart it manually. That area has no radiation shielding right now, Hansol warned. And the temperature is below freezing. Just another Tuesday on Earth, Ta-He's voice replied cheerfully. Though I could really use a hot coffee after this. Do-1 watched in amazement as the humans worked in conditions that his medical training said should be fatal. They moved through toxic areas, handled dangerous materials, and kept working even as their bodies showed signs of stress and fatigue. Finally, after 5 hours of non-stop work, the station's systems began coming back online. Power returned. Life support stabilized. Temperature and pressure normalized. When the humans returned to the command center, they looked exhausted but alive. More than alive. They were joking about their experiences. "Did you see me in Section 7? Tahi asked Jai-yun. "Zero gravity while trying to reconnect power cables. Just like that spacewalk training back home." "At least you had solid ground," Jai-yun laughed. "I had to swim through coolant leak to reach the backup generators. My skin's going to be blue for days." Do-won rushed to examine them. Despite everything they'd been through, their bodies were already recovering. Bruises were healing. Radiation damage was being repaired. Even their frozen fingers were regaining normal color. "Impossible," he muttered, checking his readings. "You've all been exposed to at least 6 different lethal conditions in the past 5 hours. How are you still functioning?" "That's just how humans are," Jai-yun said, accepting a warm drink from another crew member. "We adapt. We survive. It's what we do best." Later that night, after the rescue ships had arrived and the crisis was fully contained, Do-won sat down to write his final report to the Galactic Council. "Today's events have proven beyond doubt that human biology operates outside our understood limits of life," he wrote. "They don't just survive in extreme conditions, they thrive in them. Their bodies don't just endure damage, they get stronger from it. They don't just adapt to their environment, they adapt faster than we thought possible." He paused, thinking about everything he had learned about humans. Then he added, "In conclusion, there is nothing wrong with human biology. Rather, humans show us that our understanding of biology has been far too limited. They evolved on a planet that tried to kill them in countless ways, and instead of dying, they turned every challenge into an advantage. Their weird biology isn't a flaw. It's the result of surviving on a world that forced them to become the ultimate adaptable species." Do-won looked through his office window at the humans, who were now teaching some of the station's crew members how to play something called volleyball in the newly restored recreation area. Despite their ordeal, they were energetic and happy. "Final recommendation," he wrote, "establish immediate diplomatic relations with Earth. Not just for scientific research, but for practical reasons. In a galaxy full of dangers, we would be wise to have these incredibly resilient beings as our allies. Because if there's one thing we've learned about humans, it's this: what doesn't kill them really does make them stronger, and almost nothing can kill them." As if to emphasize his point, he heard a crash from the recreation area, followed by laughter. When he looked out, he saw that Tahi had accidentally hit his head on a wall while jumping for the ball. Instead of seeking medical attention, he was proudly showing off the bump and telling stories about worse injuries he'd survived. Do-won shook his head and smiled. Humans would never stop surprising them. And maybe that was the biggest lesson of all. In a universe full of wonders, the most amazing species might be the ones who look the most normal at first glance. He added one final note to his report. "P.S. If you think their biology is weird, wait until you learn about their psychology. That's going to need a whole new research department."